today's Shabbat is called the Shabbat HaGadol. It's the Great Sabbath because it's just before the Passover. The Passover and how it's kept, how to keep it, that's one of the main topics that's typically discussed on this kind of day. But because the first Passover was a very unique situation, they never really had to exactly repeat all of those events. Once the tabernacle was set up, they didn't slaughter the lambs in their own homes like they did the first time. They didn't put the blood over the doorposts like they did that first time. But it was an event that they were supposed to remember every year. As if they were making that escape from Egypt by God's mighty hand and outstretched arm, as if they were there as a part of those events. That was what the dinner, what the Seder is supposed to help them remember, to remind them of his power, power over the gods of Egypt and every other god for that matter. It was to remind them of his redemption. It was supposed to remind them of his rescue. It was to remind them that while they went into Egypt as a small family, around 70 people, they emerged as a nation. A nation that gathered even a mixed multitude to come with them. All of them, Jew and Gentile, were to be made into one nation, one new man together. Passover was actually supposed to help facilitate all of that. As if we were there, as if we are living in that legacy of faith that started with the call of Abraham into the life of Isaac and Jacob. Passover is supposed to reinforce our connection to that history, to that people, to that larger redemptive plan of God that he has been doing all along. Messiah, his sacrifice, that's an essential part of all of that. He is what makes it possible for those future generations of mixed multitudes to even have a place at the table. And this is where we started to miss out on something in our history. When we have removed ourselves from celebrating the Passover, we actually weaken that understanding. We weaken that connection that we are with this people. We are connected to this people. We weaken that understanding that actually God has been working his redemptive plan all along, and it didn't just start at the Gospel of Matthew. It leads our theologians to develop all sorts of ideas and concepts where God started something completely new and he just essentially threw away and discarded the past of what he had been doing. To think that all the things of the Jewish faith and that Jewish way of life is just done and discarded and no longer have a place in the life of those who believe in Messiah. That Acts chapter 2 created an entirely new entity with a new destiny and a new way of life that replaces the nation that God had made. It's when we pull things like the Lord's Supper, when we pull communion out of that context of Passover, that actually contributes to that misunderstanding. Making communion a separate and distinct thing contributes to keeping Jew and Gentile in two different camps, doesn't it? Keeps us separate. It makes a statement, essentially, that we were not really there at the Exodus. We are not really connected to what God was doing in rescuing his people from Egypt, that he does not really take us to Mount Sinai and include us in that covenant that was cut there and even the subsequent covenants. See, most of us grew up not really wanting to be there at Sinai, did we? We didn't really want to be a part of all the laws, all the rules, all the sacrifices and the priesthood given at Mount Sinai, right? Most of us did not grow up saying, oh man, I want to be a part of that part. You hear some people talk about it. They see it as barbaric, it's a bloody, you'll even hear people say it's almost a slap in the face of Messiah Yeshua, who is our sacrifice. Has anybody else heard that before? Because I have. But we forget, that the apostles, the early believers in Jerusalem and surrounding that whole nation in Israel, they did not see a conflict. They continued to go to the temple on a daily basis. They continued to keep the feast like Passover. They continued to make offerings at the temple. They did that so long as they were allowed to. They did that until the temple fell. That was actually one of the things that surprised the audience there on Thursday night, is that they didn't realize. It never quite dawned on them. That's like, oh yeah, they were still going to the temple. That means that they would have had to keep doing all these things along with them. And it was because they understood that Messiah is not incompatible with those things. Messiah is not incompatible with the offerings and the temple service and all of those other things. Messiah has got to be understood within the context of that world, especially Passover and unleavened bread, or as Paul put it, to the Corinthians, he says, "Get rid of the old chametz, so that you may be a new batch, just as you are unleavened. For Messiah, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed. Therefore, let us celebrate the feast, not with the old chametz, the chametz of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread, the matzah of sincerity and truth." Paul is writing this to Corinth, and it is, how would you characterize it? It is mostly Jewish or mostly Gentile? It's mostly Gentile congregation. Does Paul expect them to have a working, at least an understanding of Passover? Does he expect them to have a working knowledge of chametz and yeast and unleavened bread and how they're supposed to conduct themselves in that time of year? Yeah, he expects even these Gentiles to have an understanding of how that all works. And as a result, is kind of we talked about last week, is in the sense of, because we have often skipped over or kind of breezed through Leviticus, we don't understand a lot of those things with it. But these Gentiles are supposed to have a growing understanding of how books like Leviticus work. In fact, Messiah Yeshua, he also had a very good working knowledge of Leviticus and the temple system that it set up. He respected it, he participated in it, and he worked within it. So when we look at this portion, we're mostly going to be looking at Yeshua and how his opinion or his respect for this system that is in place. See, Leviticus opens up with the importance of all of these different kinds of offerings and how they are supposed to be conducted. Chapter 6, this week's Torah portion, opens up with the Torah for burnt offerings and then the grain offerings. When we get to the end of the portion, it gets into the consecration of the priesthood. Chapter 8 says, "Then Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, Take Aaron and his sons with them, the garments, the anointing oil, the bowl of the sin offering, the 2 rams, and the basket of matzah. Then assemble all the congregation at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And so Moses did as Adonai commanded him, when the congregation was assembled at the entrance of the tent of meeting." It then talks about all the different kinds of clothing and garments that the priest is supposed to wear. And in verse 12 it says, "He poured some of the anointing oil on Aaron's head and anointed him to consecrate him." The same types of things happen with Aaron's sons in the process of consecrating them. In verse 30 it says, "Then Moses took some of the anointing oil and some of the blood which was on the altar and sprinkled it on Aaron, on his garments and on his sons, and on his sons' garments with him. So he consecrated Aaron, his garments, his sons, and his sons' garments with him." So that office, that sense of consecration, that was important and significant, especially even in the eyes of God. Right? Was the idea of anointing taken seriously? Yes, it was. How did David treat God's anointed Saul? Was he willing to strike him? Was he willing to kill him when he had the opportunity? No. Even though Saul was not the future, because of that true anointing as the king, Saul would not strike him down. But the anointing of the priesthood is also important and significant in the eyes of God. And I've been racking my brain for the last several days to try to figure out, and I have not found anything yet, so I But as far as I know, Yeshua never spoke negatively about the priests or the priesthood, especially as they were fulfilling their duty in those roles. He would criticize the scribes and the Pharisees, some of whom may have been Levites, some of whom may have been priests, right? He had some disagreements, he had some arguments with them, but he did not criticize them or their office that they were anointed to. Neither did Yeshua ever criticize the offerings or the sacrifices. He would criticize the hearts of those that were maybe doing the offering, but he did not criticize the offering themselves. To do so would be to speak against the Torah. To do so would be to speak against the system that his father had commanded them to do. To do so would make Yeshua essentially a false teacher and a false prophet. In other words, he would not be the Messiah if he spoke against those things. Instead, Yeshua upheld their place and their anointing. He even defended the priests against what some could criticize them with. Maybe some had. Matthew chapter 12, verse 5 says, "Haven't you read in the Torah that on the Shabbat, the Kohanim, the priests in the temple, break Shabbat and yet are innocent? But I tell you that something greater than the temple is here." See, they were criticizing him and his followers for breaking Shabbat by just, grabbing a few grains of wheat and rubbing them in their hand. A relatively minor thing, right? But people, the priests, do they have to work very hard in the course of their duties? I mean, is it a strenuous activity to move all those things around, the animals, the blood, and all those other kind of things? Is it kind of a dirty work in some ways? Yes. I mean, what's that show? I can't think of the guy's name all of a sudden that features all of the what's that? What's his show called? Dirty Jobs? I think the priesthood would probably fit on that. It's hard work to do what they did. But they are not accused as priests of breaking Shabbat. Because he knows, and people should know, that the priests work very hard in fulfillment of their priestly duties. And even though Yeshua is saying, look, something greater than all of that is here, something greater, Messiah is here, in their midst, is he diminishing or lessening their role in what they do? No. He's not saying that what they're doing is not important. He's not saying the temple doesn't really matter. He is saying Messiah is here. But he does not ridicule the temple. He does not ridicule the priesthood. He does not insult it or speak against it. When you look at against the priesthood or anything, when healing a man with leprosy, with tzarat, Yeshua again upholds the temple, the Torah, and everything required. In Mark chapter 1, it says, "Moved with compassion, Yeshua stretched out his hand and touched him. He said, 'I am willing, so be cleansed.' And immediately the tzarat left him, and he was cleansed. And Yeshua sent him away at once, sternly warning him. He said to him, 'See that you say nothing to anyone, but go and show yourself to the Kohen,'" to the priest. "Then for your cleansing offer what Moses commanded as a testimony to them." Is he diminishing the significance of the priesthood or the temple? No, he's not. Later, when 10 lepers came to Yeshua, he did the same thing again. In Luke 17, as he entered a certain village, 10 men with zarat came toward him. They stood some distance away and raised their voices, saying, "Yeshua, Master, have mercy on us." And when he saw them, he said to them, "Go and show yourselves to the Kohanim." And as they went, they were cleansed. They started going even before the healing happened. But he is telling them to go and show themselves and do essentially the same thing. Do what is expected, required, asked of you as the Torah commands. So Yeshua is respecting the priest, the priesthood, and all that they are doing. Even when Yeshua prophesied about his arrest that happens later at the hands of the high priest, he still did not speak against the high priest. In Matthew chapter 20, he says, "Now as Yeshua was going up to Jerusalem, he took the 12 aside privately. And on the way he told them, 'Look, we're going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be handed over to the ruling Kohanim and the Torah scholars. They are going to condemn him to death and hand him over to the Gentiles to mock and to scourge and to crucify. Yet on the third day he will be raised up.'" Now, if I knew that was coming, I would probably put a few extra spicy words in there talking about those people who are going to be turning me over. Right? Isn't that how normally it would happen? I'm going to get arrested by those snakes. I mean, John the Baptist wouldn't hold back about saying a few things, now would he? But I don't even think he criticized the priesthood. He criticized the king. Even though the high priest, the ruling Kohanim, and the Torah scholars are going to be in the wrong, he is not criticizing them. He respected the servant. He even respected the servant of the high priest. In John chapter 18, it says, "Then Simon Peter, who had a sword," this is at his arrest, "drew it and struck the servant of the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, and cut off his right ear. Now the servant's name was Malchus. And so Yeshua said to Peter, 'Put the sword into the sheath. The cup the Father has given me, shall I never drink it?'" He tells him to put away the sword, and what does he do with the ear of that high priest, the servant? Doesn't he put it back on, essentially, and heal it? Did he have to do that? No. It's not like it was a life-threatening situation here. But this is the kind of status that he is giving to these positions. And even as Yeshua was standing before them, with all of their false accusations, with them even striking him, he did not condemn them, he did not accuse them, diminish them, didn't say that they didn't have authority or didn't have position. He didn't pull the high priest. Hey, look, guys, I am the high priest in the order of Melchizedek. You have no business accusing me. He didn't say, in just a few days, I'm going to be putting an end to this entire system because it's outdated and useless now that I'm here. He didn't do any of that kind of stuff. Not even before Pilate did Yeshua speak a bad word of them, even though they may have been in the wrong. But Yeshua was even accused of speaking against the temple, wasn't he? He was accused of speaking against the temple. Was it true? Could they find any evidence that he had spoken against the temple? Even though they said, well, he was going to destroy this temple and raise it back 3 days later, was he really talking about the physical stone temple? No. He was speaking about his body. Yeshua never spoke against the temple. Maybe only what had been done to the temple, done in the temple, by those who were supposed to be in charge of the temple. Mark chapter 11 says they came to Jerusalem, and he entered the temple and started to drive out those selling and buying in the temple. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those selling doves, and he wouldn't let anyone carry goods through the temple. And he began to teach them, saying, "Is it not written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations? But you have made it a den of robbers." Is he condemning the temple? No. He is condemning, who's the you in this situation? The leaders that have allowed this to go on. The leaders who have allowed all of this extra stuff that doesn't belong there. So you guys are in the wrong for allowing this to be in there, diminishing and lessening the status of the temple. See, everything about Yeshua's life, is elevating those things and keeping those things in their proper place, in their proper respect. He is elevating the temple. His parents took him to the temple when he was how many days old? 8 days old? A month old. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm thinking of something else. I had a mistake written in here, and I was like, I'm messed up by it now. At 12 years old, where was Yeshua found? He was found in the temple, in his father's house, right? About his father's business. Every year, as a Jewish man, how many times minimum would Yeshua go to Jerusalem, to the temple? Minimum, he would go 3 times to participate in the feasts, to offer all of the sacrifices expected of a Jewish man in the Torah. Yes, Yeshua would have made offerings and sacrifices. And that goes against just about everything I grew up hearing and thinking. Anybody else? As a Christian in a traditional church, the thought of Yeshua offering a sacrifice was like, what would he need to do that for? He would have gone every year at least 3 times and done that. He would have gone and participated in a mikvah, a baptism, at least 3 times a year to go up to the temple. We don't like to think about that very often. There is the picture of Yeshua going to John the Baptist, and he's getting baptized there, and we assume that that's the only time he ever did that. But that was not the only time he ever went through a mikvah. He had to do all of these things as a part of that system. He had to do it most of the way, part way, or perfectly. Yeah, he had to do it perfectly. John even describes some of that element about the mikvah and the preparation of things. John chapter 11 says, "Now the Jewish Passover was near, and many people went up out of the regions to Jerusalem before Passover to purify themselves." And so they were searching for Yeshua, because where did they expect him to be? Doing exactly that. For chapter 12 says, 6 days before Passover, Yeshua came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, whom Yeshua had raised from the dead. Is he coming early? Yes, he's coming early. There are things that need to be done in preparation for keeping the Passover. And he went early despite the fact that he knew that there was a threat against him. He knew that it was dangerous around Jerusalem for him, and yet he went. That's how important this was. That's how necessary this was. He was doing everything required of him. There was even a moment where he was asked a question about paying a temple tax. Y'all remember that? He was asked, hey, are you going to pay the tax? Are you and your disciples? And his answer was, look, the son is exempt from paying this, right? Did he have to pay the temple tax? Yes and no. Was he exempt? Yes. That was kind of the implication. But was he going to do it anyway? Yes. To avoid any basis of accusation, to avoid any basis of someone accusing him or blaming him or saying you're not keeping the Torah. That's when he sent Peter out to catch a fish, and it had what in it? It had a coin in its mouth. Again, Yeshua is respecting all of these things. He's respecting the priests and the priesthood. He's respecting the sacrifices and the offerings. He's respecting the temple. But in our day, most of us grew up, we don't look on any of those things as favorably. Our theology has traditionally said, I am so glad that all that stuff is done away with. There's no temple, there's no sacrifices, there's no going to Jerusalem, no requirements, no expectations put upon us. And again, that was one of the things that surprised the group on Thursday night at the Seder, was that the apostles and the disciples were still going to the temple in the 40 years, as long as they were allowed to, after Yeshua's death and resurrection. They were surprised to hear that they kept participating in the life of the temple, the daily times of prayer and offerings, the feast days, the fulfillment of vows. And we don't really notice half the time or pay attention to the fact that Yeshua never spoke against the temple, the offerings, or the priests. Even when those priests tried to block Yeshua from fulfilling his purposes, he would refute them without diminishing their position. That's what happened on this day in the life of Yeshua leading up to Passover. Remember this passage from Exodus 12. Adonai spoke to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, "This month will mark the beginning of months for you. It is to be the first month of the year for you. Tell all the congregation of Israel that on the 10th day of this month each man is to take a lamb for his family, one lamb for the household." And today is that day. It is the 10th day of the first month. And on that day, the lamb, the one for the national sacrifice raised in Bethlehem, was brought in through, this is not working. I expected to have a laser pointer here. Bethlehem is down here, but they would bring the lamb up through the north gate. It's actually called, I'll zoom in on that in just a minute. They'll bring him in through the north gate. Each group of men would get their own Passover lamb, but there was always at least the one that would symbolize the offering for the nation. So they'd come in through this sheep gate up here. And while the national lamb was coming in from the north gate, Yeshua himself was coming in. He's over here in Bethany, Bethpage. He's coming in here from the east. And he comes in through the eastern gate over here. And as Yeshua himself is coming in, he and his followers, were they solemn and quiet, still, marching forward in drudgery? No, they were a pretty rowdy crowd, weren't they? Yeshua and his followers disrupted the ceremony that was coming in on the north, which was going on at about the same time. John chapter 12 says, "The next day the huge crowd that had come up for the feast heard that Yeshua was coming to Jerusalem. So they took palm branches and went out to meet him, shouting, 'Hoshiana, Baruch haba b'shem Adonai. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, the King of Israel.' Finding a young donkey, Yeshua sat on it, as it is written, 'Fear not, daughter of Zion. Look, your king is coming, sitting on a donkey's colt.' And his disciples did not understand these things at first, but when Yeshua was glorified, then they remembered that these things were written about him, and that the crowd had done these things for him." It says in verse 17, did I get this out of order? Okay, so the crowd which had been with Yeshua when he called Lazarus out of the tomb and raised him from the dead kept on telling everyone about it. It was also for this reason that the crowd came out to meet him, because they heard that he had performed this sign. So those Pharisees, again, some of them likely priests and Levites, were upset that Yeshua was taking this attention away from the lamb that was being brought in through the north gate. And they tried to get Yeshua to silence his disciples, to curb their enthusiasm. And did he go along with that, or did he refuse? He refused. But he refused not by insulting them, but by elevating himself at this moment, elevating this moment, and showing them true compassion for what they're missing out on, what they're not able to see. Luke chapter 19, it says, some of the Pharisees from the crowd said to him, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples. Keep them quiet. Don't you know something more important than you is going on over here?" But answering, Yeshua said, "I tell you that if these keep silent, the stones will shout out." And as he drew near and saw Jerusalem, he wept over her, saying, if only you had recognized this day the things that lead to shalom, but now they are hidden from your eyes. This was such an important moment, because those Pharisees, those priests, the Levites, the teachers of the law, those that were in charge of all of that ceremony, they were the ones that were supposed to be the ones that recognized Messiah when he comes. They were supposed to be the ones that would help announce him when he comes, that the king has come. They were the ones that would be putting the official stamp on the king's arrival. And they missed their moment. They did not see and recognize him. And because they did not see and recognize him for who he was in this moment, if only they had recognized this day, how things would have gone differently. Right? Are we benefiting from the fact that they did not recognize him on that day? Yes. We are benefiting from that. Their blindness, as Paul talks about, led to salvation, led to that door opening up for the Gentiles. And when you think about it, though, when you consider their opinion, their perspective, the Pharisees, about rebuking his disciples, it's not like they didn't have legitimate concerns in this moment. They believed that the nation, that its survival was at stake here. They believed it was connected to what was going to happen with Yeshua. And actually, it was a very sympathetic statement that John gives in John chapter 11. John chapter 11 says, so the ruling Kohanim and Pharisees called a meeting of the Sanhedrin. What are we doing, they asked. This man is performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. That's not a bad thing. But what they were afraid of, the Romans will come and take away both our holy place and our nation. That's what they were afraid of. If he's not the one, we're going to lose everything. One of them, Caiaphas, who was the high priest, the Kohen Gadol that year, said to them, you know nothing. You don't take into account that it is better for you that one man die for the people rather than the whole nation to be destroyed. Now he did not say this by himself, but as the Kohen Gadol that year, he prophesied that Yeshua would die for the nation, and not for the nation only, but also so that he might gather together into one the scattered children of God. Is the role of the high priest being diminished in this sequence? Criticized? Insulted? Not at all. See, they did not recognize Yeshua as Messiah, and since they thought him false, they feared he would get the whole nation destroyed. We talk about this sometimes, with some of our politicians. I sure hope so-and-so doesn't get elected, because if they get elected, then the whole country is going to ruin. Right? I've heard that about both sides say that about the other guy's guy, right? Sometimes we're right and they do or are destroying the country. But at the same time, we may think that about the one that's there, they're thinking of the other side that their guy is great, and that, right? But they feared he would get the whole nation destroyed. But what amazes me in this moment that John describes what's going on with the high priest, that as blind as the high priest Caiaphas was to the identity of Messiah, as much as we make him into a villain, is he still speaking truth? Yes, he is. He was right. God still spoke through him. He still was called, he was prophesying in his role. It is better for the nation that one man die. It was true that Yeshua was going to die for the nation. And it's true that Yeshua's death is one day going to gather together into one the scattered children of God. All of those descendants of Abraham and all of that mixed multitude, just like that first Exodus. Caiaphas spoke the truth. Because Yeshua is the Passover lamb that redeems his people. Yeshua was brought into Jerusalem on the 10th day. And then what's supposed to happen? Exodus chapter 12, you must watch over it until the 14th day of the same month. Then the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel is to slaughter it at twilight. And what happened to Yeshua over the course of, is the same thing that happened to the lamb that they had taken into their house. He would be examined and he would be tested to make sure that there was no fault that could be found in him, right? Luke chapter 19, the Gospels make this point multiple times. He was teaching every day in the temple. The ruling Kohanim and the Torah scholars, even the leaders of the people, were trying to destroy him, to discredit him, to find a blemish or a fault or flaw. But they could not find any way to do it because all the people were hanging on his words. Luke chapter 20, it says, "And they could not trap him in his words in the presence of the people, and astonished by his answer, they kept silent." Chapter 20, verse 39 says, "Some of the Torah scholars replied, 'Teacher, you have said it well,' for they no longer dared to question him about anything." Matthew chapter 26 says, "Now the ruling Kohanim and all the Sanhedrin, they kept trying to get false testimony against Yeshua so they could put him to death. But they found none, though many false witnesses came forward." So they could not find a basis, a fault or flaw in what he was teaching and what he was saying. So let's go find somebody who will make up stuff about him. And even that didn't work. Chapter 23 of Luke, it says, "Now Pilate called together the ruling Kohanim, the leaders of the people, and he said to them, 'You brought this man to me as one who incites the people to revolt. But having examined him in your presence, I have found no case against this man regarding what you accuse him of doing. Nor did Herod, for he sent him back to us. Indeed, he has done nothing that is worthy of death.'" Even a brutal man like Pilate found no basis of accusation against him, no threat to his authority or his rule. Yeshua was a spotless lamb, intended to die for the nation as an offering. And we don't always understand the significance of that because we downplay or we don't understand the priests, the offerings, the temple. We ignore Leviticus. We don't realize that in some way or some form, we don't really even want to understand a lot of times that some way or another, this system is coming back. And there's something going to be functioning and operational before his return. I mean, the Antichrist cannot stop a daily sacrifice that's not going on, can he? See, we think the temple and this system is incompatible with faith in Yeshua, but even the apostles did not think that. We're so far removed, we have so distanced any of this stuff from our life, from our theology, we think there's a problem. But the ones that were closest to it says, no, I see no conflict here. And we also need to understand there is that Passover in the future for God's people. He is going to celebrate this again with his people. "I will not drink of this cup again until it finds its fulfillment in the kingdom of God." What we are doing now, what we're getting to do this week, this Wednesday as a part of our fellowship, that's a rehearsal. That's practice for us, for the ones who come to Yeshua, for the ones that he is going to share with us, when we are given that privilege, that opportunity to recline with him in the Feast of Passover, that he looks forward to keeping with his people. Matthew chapter 8, he says, "Moreover, I tell you that many will come from the east and the west, and they will recline at table with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven." He is not the God of the dead. He is the God of the living. So we are going to be a part of all of that. Don't you want to be there at that table with them? I mean, I suspect it's going to be a really big table, and we'll probably be sitting pretty far away from them, but I still want to be there. I want to have a place at that table. And how do we reserve our place at the table? Isn't it by believing in the Lamb? By putting our faith and our trust in the provision of God that was first spoken of at the beginning of the whole book. That was spoken of about the Lord himself will provide the Lamb. That's our Messiah. That's how we reserve our place at this table. That's how we are gathered and come from the east and the west to recline. And why on this night do we recline? Isn't that one of the basic questions of Passover? That helps us understand not only the method of our salvation, but also the future that we have in store. Amen.